you imagine you can be transformed to the French Polynesia? Yeah? Really in a kingdom far, far away. Yeah? So this is France, Paris. Where are we? We're over here somewhere, right? So French Polynesia is probably closer to New Zealand than it is to the United States. If you remember a long time ago when we were trying to make our way there, our French colleagues, or moving on, suggested that you can fly through Vancouver or something like that. We now know what they meant. So when COVID hit, you always have to fly through the US, no matter what. You always have to stop somewhere, whether it's San Francisco or Washington State or somewhere in this, and then you move on there because the flight is too long. So this is like 12 hours of flight. This is 5 hours to New Zealand and so on. But because of the COVID restrictions and the US being closed for a while, the only way to come from Paris, which is the main country overseeing French Polynesia, you have to go to Vancouver in Canada, and then from there they would fly. But then they stopped that, just for everyone's information. Remember, we were like, why would you go through Canada to it? So there was an explanation to that and stuff. But we're here to talk about a very special country, in the sense of why and how ESL, the early school leavers, is actually perceived or is happening and so on. It is very different to everyone else's country here. So I will tell you all about it. So you can close your eyes and transport yourself to that lovely place. Country statistics. As you might expect, most of the people living there are natives, so the Polynesians. The type of people that you see in Moana movie, and I will obviously have a character of that movie there later on and so on. The other percentage of people who live there are two types of French. One of them are local French, and one of them are metropolitan French, meaning that flying from mainland France. So I met quite a few of those in with my visiting professorship in Lyon and in Paris and so on. So actually, French government does a lot to integrate the smaller territories in with the mainland and so on. And people go back and forth quite often. There's about 5 flights a day if you wanted to fly, from Paris and so on to somewhere else like Tahiti. But again, if you can just keep in mind the percentage, 78 versus 6 or 4. So local French 6% are those who either married the Polynesian, usually women, and stayed, people who retired there, or people who just were born to a French family and decided to stay on their set of islands and so on. But the interesting part that everyone sort of is talking about is how does a country like that survives in the ever sort of challenging and crisis inflicted world and so on. So I pulled up some data from the what's called the comparison of like cost of living and so on, and it compares sort of a pre-COVID cost of living of every sort of country in the world to the ones in New York. So in New York, if you have like if you in Tahiti, if you have $1,000, it will be an equivalent to roughly $800 in New York. So you spend more. Everything is more expensive, which is kind of explained itself because everything has to be flown in and things. Grocery prices is a major international retail store. For example, Apple is $5 per kilo. The oranges again are $5 now, €5. I mean, I'm a little bit shocked by the lettuce. It's €3, so €3 because for us we go into Lidl and we could buy it for 40p, I think, something like that. So it keeps, or potatoes and so on. So, or 1 liter of milk is 3 euros. So for us it's very, well, I think it's expensive, but it just depends on how you look at it and so on. Water is not so expensive, but just to give you an idea of what the prices are like. Because then you compare the cost of living against the salaries and the expectations of different people. So, 78% Polynesians, 6 to 4% of the locals and so on. And if you just bear with me one more time on the cost of living, because it's usually better when it's in a graph and things like that, right? So here's if you have, I don't know, $100 in New York, which we would perceive as expensive anyways, right? It's not the cheapest place, it's not Texas, for example. So alcohol is cheaper in Tahiti, clothing is probably a bit more expensive, communication is more expensive, so the mobile phones and whatnot. Education, as you see, is less. This is kind of what we're focusing on at the moment. Other sort of groceries and so on, expensive. Healthcare is cheaper because they're French. So the social system is still there, and you know, a lot of support and so on. So just you know, just to give you an idea, what really stands out is the transport costs. It's not a test. I'm not going to ask you why, because all the energy has to be sort of flown in essentially. There's no natural resources and stuff, so it's extremely expensive. So we will leave the transport, cost of alcohol and so on aside, and we will look at education. And again, the sort of the information that we pulled out from different sources and so on says that actually, if we look at the price, so it's for people who come not necessarily from France but from expats. That's the estimate. So primary school is about 11,000, so it's about what, 1,000 a month, and for high school it's a little bit more than 1,000 a month, or a little bit less, and so on. So for us, that's what we pay anyways in the UK. You know, if you can send a little child to crash and so on. But overall, for the locals, the cost for items as crash and preschool fees and so on, high school fees and tertiary study fees are normally considered low. So what they say is that it's quite common for the family to look after the small children, for you know, kind of like the not too dissimilar to Greece or Turkey, where grandmas are looking after the whatever, aunties and so on, but they tend to pay them for it. It's a customary thing, so you pay a little bit, not a whole lot, but we will move on from there. So, and this seems to be quite pleasant. Yeah. Primary education, and we'll talk about primary education. So France pumps a lot of money into the educational system in the French Polynesia. This is a local sort of pre-primary, I guess, the crash schools and so on. Systems is very similar to that of France, not only because of the medium of instruction, it's all in French. So they instilled French in 1962 as an educational language and so on, and it is compulsory to the age of 16. Why not? It's free, you can go to school, it's fairly pleasant, and so on. Children begin at primary school at the age of 5 and remain there for 6 years. So everyone is taken care of, they are looked after, lovely nurses and so on, yeah. What could go wrong? Families are huge importance in French Polynesia. Everyone spends a lot of time outside, playing, having fun, so there's a lot of, if you sort of think of the French perspective of joie de vivre, right, the joy of life, and so on, so they do the same in French Polynesia, but at a different level. There's a lot of sort of the family, not necessarily the closest ones, not only the parents, but there's involvement of everyone is probably related, I would think. So this is a picture of them singing sort of native Polynesian songs and learning how to sort sort of, again, sort of more on a moment where they all sort of sing little songs and so on. But so far, quite a lovely sort of outlook on how it's happening, you know, primary education and so on, involvement of supportive teachers, of supportive families and so on, yeah, beautiful life. Secondary education. They take children from a further sort of 7 years through the age of 17. The 16, 17 seems to be used interchangeably in different sources, so we will go with what they say. The first 6 years are compulsory, but this is where the interesting part happens. Very few islanders, actually, the native Polynesians, the French are fine. The native Polynesians don't make it through high school. The public schools are fully financed. There are private schools, but they are not prohibitive, as we have seen before, sort of about 900 or something euros and so on. Private schools have also donations from churches, and then final examinations when they sit, they can go anywhere they want. There's French Polynesia, University of French Polynesia, which is connected to University of Hawaii, which is a good, by American standard, is a good school. You can go and interchange your credits and so on, but we'll talk about the universities a little bit later. Again, the government is paying a lot for the infrastructure to support teenagers. So if I can click on this, you could see teenagers sort of skating around, but I lost my video capability once I switched to a smaller file size and so on. So again, why that is the case? Why, you know, if everything is fully financed, why they don't stay in the school? I thought I would have to touch upon this module that we are talking about, extracurricular activities. The not only extracurricular activities, but the summer holidays are also very generous. So they are very much the same as the French. So they go back on the last week of August and leave at the start of July. So there's plenty of time to enjoy life and to do things such as Moana dancing again. So, I think this is some sort of a pageant, a beauty pageant and stuff. Again, sort of football is important. You know, there's a lot of social activities going on the island that is barely sort of, the whole country is only 180 to 200,000 people, population-wise. So what is, you know, why with all this idyllic sort of surroundings and so much attention and support being, you know, in this happy country and so on, why sort of something that is going wrong? So allegedly there is a rate of 98%. Most people speak Polynesian or Tahitian language, or whatever the native language it was. But French was only introduced about 60 years ago. So could you imagine the previous generation only spoke Tahitian, and then the French was introduced as a medium for studying. So that answers your question of why not everyone sort of has the support from the family and so on. It has taken a while for the schools to become more tolerant to the Tahitian language, so they actually now integrate the lessons into it, but it has taken too long over time. I'm not sure if you sort of can relate to history, but Paul Gauguin at some point went to the French Polynesia, and was so half of his paintings are about the devastating impact of this Western civilizations on the native Polynesians and so on. But, so what happens? So the main city, as it always sort of quite often happens, is kind of where all the services are. There's not much industry, there's nothing to produce and so on in the country. But smaller islands, the dropout rate of the schools is extremely, extremely high. So they can only, sometimes they see only 20% finish the school.
Finishing elementary school?
No, but to get through the age of 16 when it's compulsory. So it's 80% dropout rate. So England compares okay to that part. What happens to the dropouts? What happens to the children who go into an economy that has no industry, there's no natural resources, there's no any communication, there's no transport as such, it's very limited where to go. So usually what happens is the easiest way, I'm going to drop out of school, I'm going to get a job in a supermarket. So that's our Carrefour, and so on. But the lady that I spoke to, that I mentioned to you the other day, the management consultant, so she actually, she went to that route of going to work for Carrefour as a checkout person, but she said what was difficult, or what is difficult, and it prevents a lot of children to enter that profession, is that the IT skills. These days you need to not only operate the French tills, right? So you have to speak French. You need to know how to operate the computer machinery, because everything that is in French Polynesia is French. So everything is imported. So in order to plug in all the sort of electrical devices and work through it and stuff, you have to have not only good grasp of French, but also good grasp of IT. And this is where quite a few people falter and find themselves that a year or two later, after the school is behind them, they have no job, or they have not been able to hold on to their job and so on. For girls, option A is to get married, and for boys, option B is, I wasn't told what is the option B. But this is just to give you an idea of why. So actually Carrefour itself is setting up a mirror image of the Deuxième Chance in France, which is a second chance for people who dropped out of school. So because they found that, yes, it's easy to kind of brush people aside. No, you can't make the cut for the job. But the whole thing is that they need to support the society, and so yeah, so Carrefour is doing something about it and so on. So that was quite interesting. So it's not only Carrefour who's doing this, or any sort of industry and so on. So the reason why, so I'm a visiting professor in Lyon, and that's where a very small number of French Polynesians, maybe like one per course and so on, come to study at the university. So would you swap this, yeah, for cold France, where you're speaking a funny language, no one understands your French, you have to write essays and so on, you know, it's a different level of demand on the children, and they are displaced from their families, so they leave everyone behind and fly really, really far away. It's very, very stressful. But please do. No tuition fees. They pay, so the girl that I've spoken to, and I'm going to go and see them in December and January again, so she's studying aeronautics. So obviously in Tahiti there's nowhere to pick up, study aeronautics, so she had to fly to Lyon. So her, she has half-price travel 4 times a year, so on every holiday she go home. Her home, or her flat, is not like a dormitory like what we're used to. Her flat is half price, so she only pays about 400 euros a month for student accommodation, which is quite good because it's an expensive city, and so on. And yeah, so, and her fees are paid, and at some point she will go back and be an aeronautics engineer in Tahiti. So what happens, yeah, so travel accommodations bursary, but what French say, and particularly remember the 6 or 4% of different French, so people who come retire or immigrate there, they say that it is stressful for the locals to be displaced from this to this. So what happens is the professionals are sourced from mainland France. So when I talked to the management consultant from Carrefour, so she said that yeah, so if you're a lawyer, if you are an IT, I don't know, owner or something like that, so you would be French. So native Polynesians don't make the high grade or directories of pet food, for example. Yeah, so they're all sourced, they're all imported from mainland lands and so on. You would understand that because this is the performance rating as a university professor. This is performance rating of the University of French Polynesia, which is in Papiti. Glorious performance for anyone who could read the numbers behind me. Average grade of a bachelor of an undergraduate is a D. And for bachelors, only 27% graduate. So it's not too far off from the high school, if you think about it. So 70 plus drop out. For universities in the UK, they would have gone bust because the only time that you make money from anyone going to university is your year 2 and year 3. Before that, you don't. And then, you know, for the master graduation, they, for the master's degrees, they kind of get themselves together a little bit, and it becomes the opposite. So they actually try to graduate and stuff. But again, with glorious grade of C, solid C. So of course, they have to rely on the French and so on to supply professional services. I ask you the question, why would you want to leave a beautiful country to do anything else? And this was supposed to be an animation, so do forgive me and stuff. So you were supposed to look at this picture, not seeing this, and I should have asked you the question, what were they doing? And the answer is not digging a grave, right? So just not to give you any kind of morbid ideas and so on. So it's a typical, apparently, it's a typical kind of Polynesian or Tahitian or just overall sort of Pacific sort of thing of, it's a Sunday roast dinner, yeah? So it's made, I'm not sure how long they have to cook it, but basically there's a hole dug out in the ground, filled with lava stones. Again, moana, that's all I could think of. And so on. They load food into it, cover it with something, whatever that is, and we send. And it stays there. And it's a very communal, so people are coming, you know, together as a, you know, not family, but as a community. It's very strong and so on. And then they take the food out and everyone eats it. Not good for COVID, right? When you have to be so close to other people. So the way that French described it, they said, "Elle est heureuse." They are very happy. The people in French Polynesia don't want to leave this behind. They're happy with very little of what they have. And this is actually, it happens every Sunday apparently. So ukulele is singing songs, drinking beer, and having food is a very happy life. And how the French said, they don't need much to be happy. So an illustration of that is a little bin, a trash can, made an instrument of it. Drum. It's like, I have a video of it, it's like, it's almost like a guitar, but only one string and stuff. But the French were just loving it, they were like, a little bit, moving on, and stuff. So yeah. And apparently, what we always see, kind of the flowers and so on, it's very common. It's every Sunday, everyone buys them and so on. But yeah, so to bring my short presentation sort of to a close, the issue is that the technology demands are so different between the cultures. The difference in what going to work actually means for people is different. The language barrier, so could you imagine those people, they only spoke Tahitian before, and now they have to speak French. There is a in-between kind of French-ish, kind of similar to what Creole is in Caribbean, where the Africans speak half French, half their language, so they have something in between as well. But yeah, I mean, but the whole thing is that the families of these people don't seem to push their children at kind of the teenagers' age. So that's what the girl was saying also from the aeronautics. And the boys don't want to go to school, they just go, well, my father didn't go to school, my grandmother didn't go to school, and they're here, they're all happy. Yeah? So why not? 80% dropout rate.